And let me know if you guys can see my screen. That happens sometimes. You just cannot see my screen. Is that the right one? Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So again, bare bones README. This is something that I did with Flyte Snacks, and some of you guys appreciated it. So that helps me in probably building better documentation for deployment as well. So first of all, what is kustomize? Kustomize is essentially a very low configuration way and very native way of deploying applications to Kubernetes. You essentially write everything as Kubernetes YAMLs, and then you compose them together to form your application. So, so I'm basically, having there will be a README. It's going to be filled out more. I'm just, trying to write the documentation as we go along. But an example of this is customization. Customization or kustomize. In kustomize, the most important component is customization.yaml. And the customization YAML is essentially like a composer class in any programming language. It allows you to compose multiple different YAMLs together to create the final artifact. So it's a pretty long documentation, but the cool thing is it allows you to really work with config maps and create config maps. It allows you to specify base deployments and then modify those deployments. Like, let's say in our base, we actually start off, because we are always deploying to a sandbox environment, which many times or oftentimes is a laptop. We start with Propeller having like 0.1 CPU and 100 megabytes of RAM and so on. And I've seen that some of you guys are actually trying to deploy that to production. It's amazing it works, but I'm sure it will fail after a bit. As it won't fail, but it will see performance problems and you will see memory problems and so on. So Kustomize actually makes it very easy to modify the CPU and memory for a deployment. And I'll just show how that is done. I also realized that, that for example, if you're using a cloud-based SQL engine, then you want to have password pass to it, and that should be taken care of the deployment itself. So I'm fixing all of those small little things and creating a much cleaner deployment system. And we'll mostly be using Kustomize. It also is the first class supported deployment or configuration system in Kubernetes. The other one is called Helm, but Helm is very heavyweight. Helm needs like a server to be deployed and a client to be deployed and so on. While with Kustomize, you just need kubectl or another command line called Kustomize. All right, so that's a quick overview of Kustomize. So in Kustomize, initially, if you remember the previous setup, actually maybe I have to change my sharing settings. Sorry. All right, so I think my entire screen is shared. Can you still see my screen? Okay. I'm taking silence as a yes. All right, so the current Kustomize, so there's a folder called Kustomize under Flyte. The current plus Kustomize has this thing called as base, dependencies, and overlays. And I will go through all of them. There's a slight difference now. I've gotten rid of dependencies. What dependencies really is essentially all the things that you need to get a Flyte cluster started up. So Flyte, when it starts up, it needs, in the backend, needs a database, some sort of Postgres-like database. Redis is optional, but if you have it, it gives you resource control and so on. It needs a storage system, and by storage here we mean a blob store, like one of the cloud blob stores, like S3 or Google Cloud System or Azure File System and so on. And I think we support about 5 different stores. And once you have all of this, you need to be able to expose the endpoints to your users somehow. So in the default deployment, we use ingress controller called Contour. It's based on, it's a very lightweight layer on top of Envoy, which is also a rich project. All right, so that's what we had. I got rid of it because I think these dependencies were mostly for sandbox, and so I moved them to a sandbox environment. And I'll show you that. So now the new thing looks like there's a base, and then there's an overlay. What are the base components? So base components are the admin service. So Flyte consists, if you remember, or if you've seen the documentation, Flyte consists of primarily 4 components. Actually, there are 5 components, but in the back end, it's 4 components. One of them is admin, which is actually the control plane. The console, which is the UI. Flyte Propeller, which is actually the engine that runs your workflows and tasks and so on. And data catalog. Now, data catalog is optional, but if you deploy it, you get memorization and you get artifact linking. So when the base one actually has all of these components individually configured, and you can go into, let's say, admin deployment, and you see, and I'll be adding readmes everywhere, and I'll be explaining what each one is doing. But this is a typical deployment of Flyte admin. It says deploy Flyte admin, take the image that we publish every month, and it's always at the end of the month that we update this image, and there are some volume mounts and so on, and that's about it, right? Along with that, we also deploy a doc server with Flyte admin. So Flyte admin's entire API is available as a documentation. I don't think we've ever demoed it, but it's available. So you guys should look at it. So that's the deployment. Same thing, we actually start a service. The service is very simple. It's basically saying that in Kubernetes, you have to use some sort of pattern. It's not you have to, but this is the pattern that most of the people are following, where we use some sort of annotation to indicate what type of service and how to handle it. And in this case, we are indicating it to Contour that this is how you handle the service. And actually, we should, I will just get rid of this, because this should only be for the sandbox environment. I'll explain how that works. But that's admin deployment. If you just deploy admin, what's going to happen is you'll get a service and you'll get everything running. But once you create a project, we need to create a bunch of resources for that project. And that is handled by the cluster sync utility. It's, in the default case, it's run like a Kubernetes cron. And we actually at Lyft, we don't run it like a Kubernetes cron. We run it using a more stable cron system, which is multi-cluster aware. But that's not open sourceable because that's using some internal technology. But Kubernetes cron works fine for this. The other things in base are console, data catalog, ingress, namespaces, any operators. So Flyte can be extended, as you guys know, with a bunch of operators or by writing plugins. And some of you have contributed some operators, like I think flow operators, like PyTorch and TensorFlow. Thank you for the contributions. I think Changong has been working on the SageMaker operator. And these are also deployed or available as components within the system. And you have to mark them for deployment if you want to enable this plugin system. All right. Okay, so you have all of this, different parts like Propeller is another part, right? How do you really put them together? So in each one of them, let's open Propeller. There is a customization.yaml. In the customization.yaml, you say what are the resources that it should be, this module exports. In this case, we're exporting deployment.yaml and the roles that you need, that Propeller needs. After that, you eventually go into this thing called as, I've created 2 composed systems on top of the base system. One of them is called Flyte Headless cluster. And why it's called headless because it doesn't have console and it doesn't have any of the syncing stuff. The reason why we have this is because we run all our integration tests using the same system. That's how we make sure that things are working fine. Okay. So in the headless cluster, there is a customization.yaml. And what we do is we pick out which resources, and these are not the actual customization.yaml, these are the folders which have a customization.yaml. you say, these are the resources I want to pick up. And then I'm going to build configs for all of my Flyte. And we'll talk about this in a minute. We also now support a secret as the DB path in this case. This is just awesome class. It's plain text. Don't use this. You can use the file-based primitive, read through customization.yaml and create your own password for a production deployment. But for the sandbox deployment, awesome sauce works great. Cool. And this was one of the biggest changes I've made, is all the config is now in one place. So when you want to configure Flyte, it's extremely configurable. And I don't know how to really document all of the configuration knobs that we have. And so we are actually working on a utility that will generate the entire configuration automatically. Once we get a little bit of time, we will get into that. But for now, this forms as a very good base starting configuration. And even decently advanced, and I'll show you how I've made it advanced. So, for example, if you go into admin has X number of configuration files. All of them come together to make admin work. So, for example, db.yaml tells you how to connect to a database. Then we have remote data .yaml. How do I deal with remote data when signing and so on? And how do you start the server? Do you want authentication, cards, and so on? Okay. The more complicated one is actually Propeller. This Propeller on its own has a bunch of plugins, and the most common one that you might want to use is enabled plugins. By default, we will enable some plugins, and you can add more plugins to be enabled. And these are string names of the plugins themselves. And discovery of this is interesting because it's either in the documentation or in the code, in both places. So that's how we have to find it. And the plugins themselves may have configuration, and so you add all the configuration. So for example, if you want to change how you log, how the logs are linked in the UI, you can change it in the configuration here. And we are actually thinking of changing this to be a much more flexible system. That's coming soon. All right, so once you have all of these configs, and there are a lot of them, I won't go through all of them, but you can put them together using a config map generator. So we have already created such that Flyte admin expects Flyte admin config to exist. And a Flyte admin config is actually a composition of all of these configurations. And if you notice, all of these are under admin, which I just showed you, but a couple of them are common. So for example, if you want to change the logger across the entire system, you go and update the logger.yaml to be level 5, and you start getting more verbose logging. If you want less verbose logging, change the logger.yaml, and the entire system will change. Same thing, storage.yaml is the GCS or S3 configuration in one place. And if you notice, Flyte admin, Flyte propeller, data catalog, all of them are using the same configuration. Now you don't need to. You could just copy paste and change one thing at a time if you want to. But just to simplify everything, we use the same common configurations, and each one of them has their own special configurations. And data catalog is pretty lightweight actually in configuration. All right, so this is how you generate the headless cluster. On top of it, now I can build something on top of it. So we can build the single cluster mode on top of it. And the single cluster mode is essentially uses the base as a headless cluster and adds cluster sync and console to it. That's about it. It doesn't do anything with the configs today because we just use the same configs in both cases. Now, you don't really go and deploy Flyte single cluster. You have to modify some things in it because Flyte single cluster doesn't have a storage primitive. Today, the storage primitive that it uses is in memory, which is not going to work. So then you decide whether you want to deploy it on Sandbox, GCP, EKS, and more as you build them. So if you want to deploy Sandbox, what is Sandbox? Sandbox is essentially all the dependencies of Flyte and all of the Flyte components put together into one Kubernetes cluster, packaged as one. It's great for trying out, testing, getting started, but it is not good for running it in production. We are running, like, for example, I'll tell you, we are running a database on one machine. and you don't want to run that in production, because if that database goes down, you will lose data, and that's not the expected way, right? So you should replace that with Cloud SQL, and let's see how. But other than that, all the dependencies are in here now for Sandbox. And the way we compose this is you open up customization.yaml again, and you say, I depend on my base is Flyte single cluster, but I want to add other resources to it. I want to add PyTorch operator. I want to add Spark, and then I want to also add these dependencies. I want to add Redis, and I want to add a database. I want a storage, a contour, and so on. And then I want to actually patch my admin deployment. Now we're going to look at what the patch is doing before we jump into that. Sorry, I have to go back and forth. But the patch is essentially taking Flyte admin and adding this one line to wait for the database to be ready. Because we are starting a database, sometimes it takes a little bit longer to be ready, so we don't want to get into a crash loop. We want to have a clean startup, and that's why we have this set up in the beginning. But if you add an init container, you have to replace all the containers, right? That's how it is. The other thing we also do is we set the resources to be very low, because for Sandbox environment, we want the resources to be very low. And that's about it. So that's the modification I've done on the admin deployment. I have not modified the entire deployment because I have not really created how the service starts up and so on. I've just modified the intentions I want. The way it does it, it finds the deployment with the name and the namespace and the API version. That's how it tries to match the base and then overrides it. Okay. The other cool thing that you can do with Kustomize now is you can actually create your config. And in this case, what we are saying is, because I depended already on the base Flyte single cluster, I'm getting a bunch of config from that base. But I want to add some of my own configuration. So what I did is I modified the db.yaml in this case to use the local database. I also modified the logger to be more verbose in Sandbox. And I added some cluster sync utilities for Spark, so that whenever somebody creates a new project, it creates Spark roles, Spark service account, and so on. And I enabled a couple more plugins and I added that utilities and so on. So once you do this, what it's doing, it's for each one of them, it's trying to find the name of the config element and overriding the same name. And the behavior is called merge in this case. So for example, in the previous example, or the single cluster mode, I showed you that there is a file called enabled plugins. I rewrote the same file, enabled plugins, and I edited the content. Now it will just go and find that file and replace it and create the new configuration. All right. The other thing is we will now be releasing all the images in the stock layer. This gives us control in the future to slowly release out probably once every month or maybe once every 2 months for GCP and EKS, while keeping Sandbox the most fresh. We don't have plans to do that yet because we are always trying to be stable every month, but maybe there is something that we might have to roll out slowly, which gives us a capability. And also, if you push Flyte admin to your own internal registry, you can just override the images here and it'll work. All right, so one last thing that I wanted to show is, I actually did this. Honix actually wrote a wonderful GCP overlay and I modified it to work with this new system. And it looks much cleaner. So the GCP overlay, I have to yet to modify all the text, but essentially there is a customization.yaml as explained, which actually relies on Flyte single cluster because it's a single cluster mode. And then adds data catalog and propeller services for the monitoring stuff, and patches admin and data catalog and propeller. It mostly updates the memory and CPU for all of them. The other things that I've done is also propeller. I've enabled all configuration in propeller to be the high performance configuration that we have within Lyft. because I realized that we didn't have that enabled, and it was running on like 4 workers, and there was no cache. The cache size was very limited, and so on. So all of that has been modified. What this will like, so if you build this customized config and you deploy, will it work for any GCP environment? It won't, because you still need to modify it to connect to your GCS, your database. And so what Honix has done is essentially added to-dos everywhere in the configuration, and so you can go into the config and you can go and modify, let's say, the common, and open up the storage.yaml, and he's written a to-do here, say replace this with your bucket, or replace this with the project type. Once you just have to modify this, and it should be able to deploy to any GCP environment. And all of these are the new things that I've added recently to improve the performance. Okay, and so is for the database. Let's quickly open up the database. I think in the database, what he's done is said, okay, let's find the password here, and instead of using the default database, we use proxy, code proxy. How do you build all of this? So if you clone Flyte repo, there is a make customize command that will build all of the customized overlays. Other option is just to brew, install, customize, or apt-get install, customize, any of your customize, and just go to the folder, the overlay that you want in your clone repo, and find, like, it should have a customization.yaml. So in this case, maybe the sandbox, right? And you can just run customize build dot, and that will find the local customization.yaml and build the entire overlay. And the final build looks something like this. This is the final build that it looks like. It's one big gigantic file that's putting together everything. So let's say you find a bug, you did something wrong. You can just always go and look up this file and edit this file. Like, for example, this is a configuration. And this configuration is for, I think, for admin. So it's putting all of your configs together, and let's say you modify the logger.yaml and you wanted to check that. Just open this up and check it. And that's like an easy way to do it. And so, yeah, so all the config is in one place. Everything is just in one place. That's what's beautiful about customization. It is kind of limiting, though. You cannot really remove things from the base. Like, there's no deletion primitive available in customization. So if you want to do something funky, like you want to deploy admin to a different cluster and prepare it to a different, then it's better to start off with the base components and build your own overlay. And for that, customization actually allows you to reference a remote Git repository, customization.yaml, as a base, and it will automatically. I don't know how it really does it. It probably uses the go-get module in Golang. So yeah, it works pretty well that way. And you can ping to a specific version. I think Freenome has already done that, for example. And so any mutations over here won't really affect you. But, so hopefully that's a quick overview. I'm hoping that in the next month or so, I'll have this, or not next month, next week, I will have this out. With the documentation, and you should be able to deploy it to your environments. I would need volunteers who can help me test it in GCP. That would be great. I don't really I have a GCP account now, so I might test it, but if you guys can.
I'll be setting up a GCP cluster this week. So.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
good timing.
Yeah.
This looks great. The to-dos make sense.
Yeah.
And thanks for the overview of the system. There's so many details.
Yeah, it's I realize that not a lot of people probably have ever used customization or customize. So it's a simple tool, but it can get hairy. So I realize every configuration tool does. Yep, that's. Let me stop sharing my screen. Okay. I lost it somewhere.
Honix, I saw a pull request from Honix today. It says like use later overlay for GCP. So today we deployed like a our Flyte cluster with the latest GCP overlay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it would be good to get more testing from.
Oh yeah, I think you guys have your own, right, internal deployment, but I think the configuration from here, you should definitely look at and update. And the configuration tool is going to be one of the things that we work on pretty soon, so that you can just modify that pretty quickly. Your Flyte has a lot of configuration, just a lot. That's what makes it flexible and scalable, but it also makes it really hard to keep on improving it unless you read through the code. At some point, you have to look at the configuration options available and then update that configuration. But I have now started off with a pretty high quality configuration. Okay, it mimics our production configuration. All right, so we can do Q&A, or George had one agenda item before we do the Q&A. We wanted to see if you guys like this bi-weekly cadence, or do you want to move to a once a month cadence? Either way, it works with us. That's actually a poll.
Yeah, bi-weekly seems nice to me.
Same.
All right.
Same.
So do you get value from it, right? It's not like, hey, these guys are just showing up and talking about something.
No, I think it's really important to like hear what you have been working on. And we get like context on different things every 2 weeks, which is cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. I would like that if you guys have use cases and things like that, would love to, you should showcase them in this, and that really helps, because not a lot of people join these meetings. There are many people who are just seeing the video after the fact, and probably use cases help them a lot. Sure, then we'll continue with this bi-weekly thing. Let's do Q&A. Any questions, comments? I also see new people. I don't think we've said hi to everybody.
So I can introduce for Freenome. I'm Lior. I'm one of the software engineers at Freenome, as is Verinda and Steven and Will. Will's our TPM on our team. And Greg Junka is one of our new team members at Freenome.
Oh, so it's awesome.
So we are in force today.
That is great. That just is amazing. Actually, Lyft has very little representation today somehow.
One thing that's on our agenda for the next quarter or so is some of the FDA regulation, and we know that's something that's interesting to the Flyte team, and so that might be something that I can have some show and tell on, or just something to share on eventually. Probably not the next meeting, but at one of these meetings.
Yeah, I think please bring it up. So,
This is
George, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that we went through a similar process at Lyft with HIPAA compliance, which is not exactly the same, but has some of the same, has a bunch of overlap. So we'd be super interested in what FDA had to say, and particularly in differences that they had between HIPAA compliance. So that would be super useful from our point of view.
Yeah, like our Flyte internal deployment is GDPR and HIPAA compliant, so we can share all that information.
Cool. Yeah, I will reach out when I'm ready to talk further. I think this week I'll focus on the setup, but it is on the agenda for the.
Awesome. Yeah. Any other Q&A comments? Hey Nelson. Yeah. Are you talking?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. We in Spotify have been busy integrate. We have a open source scheduler. Our data engineers are used to our stack, so relying something like a Chrome scheduler is not enough for our use case or what our users are used to do. So we are close to get our scheduler running with Flyte. We are already triggering launch plans. Our scheduler have their own state machine. So there are some piece of the state machine that we still need to, for example, when we halt and in the sticks, that's how we call the system, we need to propagate that to fly to terminate the flight execution. So we are finishing that, and once I'm done, I can show it here what the value that we see in this system and how people use it.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of GCP users, so you should present it for sure.
Yeah, this is like a very good observation. This is heavily based on GCP. So we use data stores, something like we plan to move away in the future, but right now it's using data store and big table.
Nelson,
Yeah.
is it open sourceable?
It is open source.
It's already open source. I can
The
share
contributions you guys are making, are the contributions you're making, are you planning to open source those?
All the development is happening in the open source.
Awesome.
Yeah. So this, just to give a little an overview to everybody, this provides backfill and all of that functionality out of the box. It won't be with Flyte. With Flyte plus ticks, essentially will give you backfill, scheduling, observability of the schedules. Like when we say schedules here, it's cron, like schedules, and more things. So this is awesome. And I think it works with Backstage as well, right?
Yeah, we have Backstage is our how we call it web page for where we integrate via plugins different part of our stack. So that's something that we have a CLI and we have a Backstage plugin, but that Backstage plugin is not open source because it depends a lot of Spotify specific infra. So it's like but these things you can use it with the CLI and
Awesome.
yeah, and
I think we're running it.
You will see.
We're going to hit our Zoom meeting.
Okay. But I was saying,
Yeah, Zoom is
all the developing is happening in the wild.
Yeah. I think, Zoom has this arbitrary restriction of 40 minutes. Any other questions? If you want, we can log back in onto the same thing, or we can call it a day.
Yeah.
I guess no questions.
Alex, I have to run, so I'll say goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining, and stay safe. Hopefully, you get more presentations next time from you guys. That'll be awesome. Sticks and Java SDK and Freenome. So cool.
Thank you. Okay, guys. We'll see y'all next 2 weeks. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.